Hi everybody, welcome to the Brain Book channel. I'm Amir, and in this video I want to talk about development of nervous system part 2. As you may know, there are three main parts of the brain, including forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. You can see here the forebrain, which include the cerebral cortex and cerebrum, the midbrain, and the hindbrain here, including the medulla oblongata, pons, and cerebellum. And there are three primary brain vesicles during the development, as we saw when during the neurulation, when the neural tube formed from the neural plate. The neural tube will become like this, and it contains three parts, including prosencephalon in the inferior part of the neural tube, mesencephalon, and rhombencephalon. The prosencephalon form the forebrain, as we saw, and mesencephalon form the midbrain, while the rhombencephalon form the hindbrain. And here you can see that the prosencephalon will form two different parts, including the telencephalon here, as we have two, it becomes our two hemisphere, right and left hemisphere, and the diencephalon, including thalamus, and the midbrain mesencephalon here form these, and rhombencephalon is divided into two parts, including metencephalon here and mielencephalon here. Here I demonstrate that each part of neural tube form which part of our brain. As you can see here, the prosencephalon become the telencephalon and diencephalon. Telencephalon becomes our cerebrum. Here you can see this part is all contained is our cerebrum, human cerebrum, and the diencephalon forms the hypothalamus and thalamus and hypothalamus here. The mesencephalon forms the midbrain, and the rhombencephalon, which divided to the metencephalon and mielencephalon, forms the pons and cerebrum from metencephalon here, pons, and cerebellum. And finally, the mielencephalon form the medulla oblongata, a part of brain stem here. During our development, the neural tube becomes like this. When the neuroectoderm becomes the neural plate and neural groove, then neural tube, the neural tube becomes like this, and then develop to this, and finally when we have a mature brain, it becomes like this. Here I draw a schematic diagram to demonstrate here which part of the brains comes from the neural tube when during and throughout the development. You can see here, for example, neural tube, in the neural tube, the rhombencephalon for the metencephalon and mielencephalon. These two parts are forming the cerebellum, pons, and medulla oblongata. Ventricle development. You know that the ventricles in our brain are some parts of our brain that do not contain neuron and glia, and they are filled with CSF or cerebrospinal fluid. derived from the central canal of the neural tube, and the tube initially forms the Y form from the right and the left hemisphere. And as the region of the brain takes shape, the ventricles are shaped into the different regions. We have four ventricles, including lateral ventricles, third ventricle, and the fourth ventricle. And we have some connecting channels between these ventricles that are named foramen of Monro and cerebral aqueduct. Here you can see that when the neural tube becomes like this, throughout the development, the ventricles will form coincidentally with the development of nervous system. And the ventricles are derived from the neural canal, and they forming early in development in a neural tube. As we say that we have a Y form, as you can see here, like the Y letter in the English alphabet. We have a Y form that these two parts form our right and left hemisphere. These part form the future lateral ventricles, left and right lateral ventricles. These part in the diencephalon form the future of third ventricle, and here these part in the mesencephalon form the future of cerebral aqueduct that connects the third and the fourth ventricle to each other. And this part in the metencephalon form the future of fourth ventricle here. And finally, in the melencephalon, it will form the spinal cord canal. Here you can see the development of the ventricles. The lateral ventricles through the development will form like this, and here I marked with the different colors to demonstrate better here. You can see here the left lateral ventricle and the right lateral ventricle are formed from this Y-formed shape, and the third ventricle developed to this, and the third ventricle and the lateral ventricles are connected through foramen of Monro. It's a foramen of Monro pore. Here they are connected, and the cerebrospinal fluid will be here and go through this foramen of Monro. And finally, here will develop to the cerebral aqueduct. Cerebral aqueduct is a place that connect the third and the fourth ventricle to each other, and the spinal cord central canal here is developed and connected to the fourth ventricle. And here is in our cranium, in a brain, and in the spinal cord central canal is go through the spinal cord. When the ventricles develop, this completely develops, they form this shape of ventricular system in our brain. As you can see here, we have a lateral ventricles in the left and right hemisphere here. And these two lateral ventricles are connected to the third ventricle via foramen of Monro. And here you can see that we have a third ventricle. The third ventricle is connected to the fourth ventricle here via the aqueduct. Uh, Among the ventricles, the fourth ventricle is the biggest one. And we have four ventricles, but you know that the first and the second ventricles are lateral ventricles. The first, second, third, and the fourth ventricle. Uh, as we get adult, our ventricular system in our brain will be mature and bigger. But during and throughout the aging, uh, throughout the normal aging, the ventricular widths occur expanded, and it's accompanied by the decrease in cortical thicknesses. You know that as we get old and older, our nervous system will be degenerated. That cause the expansion of the ventricles in our brain. And in some cases, in some neurodegenerative diseases, we can see that we have a huge expand of ventricles in the brain that's it's substitute with the neurons, and when the neurons are degenerated, the neuronal mass in the brain is shrinked, and the ventricle will be having more widths and they are expanded. And here you can see the coronal cut of the mature brain that indicates some parts of our ventricles here. For example, here you can see the lateral ventricles. There are some defects related to the ventricles. Um, for example, there is a cancer which is called pinealoma, that when the pineal glands are cancerous, they form this kind of cancer, and this results in when the tumor grow up and it's expanded in size, it results in closure of the aqueduct here. And when the aqueduct here, it's inhibit the current of the cerebrospinal fluid in this system, and it caused hydrocephalus. And it make many difficulties and deficits for patient. As it is closed, you know that ependymal cells lining in the wall of lateral ventricles produce CSF, and when the CSF accumulated in the system, it results in higher pressure of CSF in the brain and make some difficulties for patient. Also, the ventricle functions are different. The first one is producing cerebrospinal fluid, and when the CSF is produced, it results in communication and communicating network of chambers filled with this fluid, and also these fluid-filled ventricles help our brain to be buoyant and cushioned. It means that first, our brain is float in the CSF, and in the case of maybe shaking or external and environmental pressure, our brain injuries will be decreased while it is float in this CSF, and also it regulates the pressure here in the ventricles and also under the meninges layer, and yes, help them to work efficiently. And thank you for your attention. If you like this video, please put the like button and also subscribe my channel to support me to make more and more video. If you think it's helpful, please recommend it to your friends. See you later. Bye.